today's video is part 2 of a 3-part series on what is holistic psychiatry. And in the last video, I talked about the 8 areas that I think about when I'm evaluating someone with brain-related symptoms. And today I'm going to talk about ways that these different areas can interact with one another, giving specific examples, and also the treatment approaches and lifestyle changes that can impact these 8 areas. So just to briefly review from the last video, the 8 areas that I think about when I'm addressing brain-related symptoms are someone's genetic vulnerabilities, their epigenetic expression, this ability of our genes to basically be turned on and off, our microbiome, which is the balance of microbes in our gastrointestinal tract, our immune system, which is tightly bound with our central nervous system and can create inflammation when reacting to things in our environment or within our body, or even stress. Our environment, which could be toxins, electromagnetic fields, toxic relationships, trauma, and there's endless things I could list, but those are the big ones we think about. Attachment, the first 3 years of life, and how that stays within our physiology, and our autonomic nervous system, which is the next area, and that's our nervous system that is operating largely outside of our consciousness and is being expressed through our body. Our structure, involving our head, neck, and even jaw, and specifically our upper cervical spine. And our permeability, how much integrity our connective tissue has, as well as, which I didn't mention previously, our right or left brain dominance. And then our inner life, which is everything we think about ourselves, others, our future, our purpose. So though I think about these areas separately in some regards, they're constantly interacting. So for example, I might see a child who comes in and has evidence of severe OCD symptoms, that they had an onset after having had a strep infection. So that would make me think of an autoimmune response. So I would be thinking about the immune system. But then I would also be thinking, why is their immune system dysregulated in the first place? And that would lead me to wonder about biotoxins, because sometimes we have roots and then we have the roots of the roots. So, for example, someone could have mold toxicity causing a dysregulated immune system that then could cause them to have autoantibodies that are impacting a particular part of the brain. They may have a genetic vulnerability to also having problems breaking down histamine. Perhaps they were born undermethylated, so they might experience their symptoms even more dramatically and deal with more inflammation. Another person may come and have had a history of head trauma that caused initial neuroinflammation or a switch of those glial cells. And then maybe they were going along fine, no problem, and then they were on antibiotics for sinus infection and developed candida overgrowth in the gastrointestinal tract and started to have more toxicity, or perhaps they had some environmental exposure, like exposure to mold toxins, that then kicked up that neuroinflammation again, and they have another dramatic response that's very similar to when they initially had neuroinflammation. All the while, they might be experiencing autonomic dysfunction because their body is sensing danger, be it from toxins or in relation to the neuroinflammation that they're having. So it's important to keep in mind that we can experience a threat response not only because of a threat outside of us, but there could be a threat inside us. I mentioned the vagus nerve not being able to be accessed properly. But there's also toxins in the form of usually biotoxins or even endotoxins, those toxins from microbes within us, that could be sort of alerting our autonomic nervous system, and we may have a feeling of anxiety or vigilance, and we're looking for danger in our outside environment, but the danger is actually within us, trying to get our attention. Another example could be someone having neglect in their first 3 years of life and perhaps developing an avoidant or dismissive attachment style. They may experience the world through an ego-driven lens. They may not trust other people. They may have problems with their autonomic nervous system, feeling a constant state of threat because they haven't learned to experience safety in relationships. In my experience with evaluating children and adults who would fall on the avoidant and dismissive end of the attachment spectrum, they are very often undermethylated, thus have problems breaking down histamine, are more vulnerable to toxicity, and with that also vulnerable to neurotransmitter dysfunction around serotonin and dopamine specifically. So this could look like an individual who avoids relationships or is narcissistic and who has problems with attention, maybe anxiety that's not obvious to other people. They may struggle with depression, but all the while they actually may be accomplishing quite a bit in the realm of our culture in terms of what our culture values on the outside. Okay, now finally, what do we do about all these areas? What are treatment approaches and lifestyle changes that could be impacting these areas? So this type of information, know that it's useful certainly for someone who has some brain-related symptoms, but it could also be useful for anyone that's simply wanting to thrive and really be functioning at their optimal level. So when it comes to genetics and epigenetics, in all of these areas, I would say, since they're all impacting one another, anything that we do in one area is going to impact these other areas. So some people will go at their healing all through addressing their inner life, and in doing so, they're addressing their autonomic nervous system, they're addressing their microbiome, they're addressing their immune system. I would argue that it can be difficult to remove specific toxins from the body, though addressing all those other areas will help with detoxification. There are some toxins that appears that needs some extra help for some people. So, but separately, in terms of our genetics and epigenetics, there are targeted nutrients that can help, for example, compensate for undermethylation or even overmethylation. So these methylation cycles involve a lot of nutrients in key places, and so we can use targeted nutrients to help those metabolic processes work more effectively, thereby improving something like methylation and secondarily detoxification. So there are other targeted nutrients that can help the liver and the kidney detoxify better. There's also nutrients that can specifically help the gastrointestinal tract, such that we're not so permeable to specific toxins and microbes. The microbiome, this is an area that we can dramatically impact with our diet and lifestyle. So the Western diet with high carbs, a lot of sugar, and a lot of processed foods is very beneficial to problematic microbes, to candida, to mold if someone has mold colonization. So most of the problematic microbes will thrive on a Western diet. So even without looking for microbes that shouldn't be there or shouldn't be there in high populations, if people make dietary changes they will often notice benefit. And specifically, that would be, removing sugar, lowering carbs. For some people, they need to go farther than that, maybe to a paleo type diet or even a ketogenic type diet. There's a lot of individual variability in terms of what types of foods people will benefit from or have problems with, for that matter. Probiotics can be beneficial, but certainly I would say the biggest impact will be diet. The immune system, there are ways to calm our immune system, and that can often be through addressing the autonomic nervous system. And there are programs, for example, called limbic system retraining, and that lowers our physiologic sort of reactivity to that sense of threat. And in doing so, that calms not just the central nervous system down, but the immune system. And so that can be especially helpful for people that are so sensitive to any foods, supplements, or interventions they seem to react to. So they can benefit often from doing neural retraining to kind of calm things down. If someone has toxicity, which usually would be the case if someone was experiencing that level of sensitivity, but certainly addressing toxicity, addressing, for example, biotoxins will help mast cells calm down. Though we do have specific mast cell interventions, both medication, over the counter, and even herbal. We have treatment for things like candida, parasites, mold colonization, and particular other microbes. And again, there can be prescription antimicrobials, but also herbal and over-the-counter. Environment, there's many ways people can be limiting their exposure, be it to toxins in their air, in their food, in their body products. The Environmental Working Group has a lot of great information on all these topics, and I'll talk about them more in the future. And electromagnetic frequency is a significant problem and a growing problem for people with brain-related symptoms. So while there are people with what we call EHS, electromagnetic hypersensitivity, just as there can be individuals with multiple chemical sensitivity, individuals with EHS have a lot of brain-related symptoms, sometimes some low-grade neurologic symptoms as well, and other systems can be impacted. Separately, as with everything, there's a spectrum, so many people could be dealing with varying degrees of this, but the treatment essentially, there's various interventions, but the mainstay treatment is to really limit exposure. And so that can involve using Ethernet cords for computers, turning off cell phones, keeping them off the body, and there's measures that can be addressed in one's car. There are many strategies, but in short, it's to limit exposure, and I'll be doing future videos on this very topic. There are therapies and a number of tools that can help us learn how to set boundaries with those individuals in our life who may be toxic or who cause us to have a physiologic stress response. There are attachment-based therapies. There are therapies that are targeting the autonomic nervous system. And I would say while there are therapies, there's also a lot of tools and strategies that people can learn without necessarily working with a therapist. Now, working with a therapist certainly gives people that relational experience, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. For example, the strategies that access the autonomic nervous system, these could be anything from singing to dancing to gargling to specific exercises that involve the cranial nerves. Attachment, people can develop that experience through meeting someone that they trust, developing certain friendships. The limiting factor for a lot of people is their toxic relationships get in the way of them finding people who would be kind and treat them well and with whom they could form trusting relationships. In terms of structure, we all have the potential to work on our posture and to learn to avoid situations where we're sitting for a long time with a slumped posture, such as can be the case at a computer or when looking at a phone. We can access a specific therapist or a physical therapist. Sometimes it's a doctor of osteopathy with experience in craniosacral manipulation who can help address the atlas. Chiropractors who specialize in what is called atlas orthogonal can also help address this particular area. In terms of our inner life, we all can create more time for solitude, silence, and simplify our life. We can learn and practice trusting ourselves. We can seek out meaning in our experiences, whether they're positive or negative. We can envision a future for ourselves and really try to put our physiology in that state. And we can practice being present. We can practice embracing uncertainty. And we can try to do something new every day. And by that, I mean we can give our soul some adventure. And it's very easy to get in a rut and do the same things over and over again. But we can train ourselves to do something new every day. So in the next episode, I will be using myself as a case example of someone with what we call complex chronic illness or chronic complex illness, or even a canary in the coal mine, as the term has been used to describe those individuals who have a high level of sensitivity, often have multiple areas being impacted, and who can benefit from treatment approaches that involve these different areas that I've discussed. So I hope to connect with you in that video as well. Take care. Bye-bye.